Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 exceeded my expectations beyond my wildest beliefs. After Quantumania was literally my least favorite MCU movie of all time, I was ready to pack it up, go home, and to say, you know what? The MCU is great, it's just not for me. However, James Gunn, you know he's going to deliver, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is no exception. Here's my spoiler-free review, and I'm keeping it super spoiler-free. Like, we're not going into anything, so don't worry about it if you haven't seen it yet. This should hopefully get you hyped up for the movie when you see it this weekend. So now James Gunn has shown that he can be successful in both the MCU, the DCEU, and now he's the CEO of DC. So clearly, if anyone knows what they're doing with comic book movies, is James Gunn. So I don't know why I was doubting this movie would be great. I thought this was going to be like a 4 out of 5 was my most optimistic predictions here. But spoiler alert, this is a 5 out of 5 star for me, a 9.5 out of 10. I'm just going to say that right off the bat. For reference, I gave Guardians 1 an 8.5 out of 10 and Guardians 2 a 7.5 out of 10. This is the best of the three, and this is my second highest rated MCU movie of all time, only behind Avengers Infinity War. Now, what is James Gunn's specialty when it comes to comic book movies? Well, it's really two things. One, a banger soundtrack. This is no exception. This is my favorite soundtrack there's ever been for a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I've been listening to it ever since I saw it in the theaters, and it's genuinely making me sad, not necessarily because of what happens in the movie, but because it's just over. There's no more Guardians movies. There's no more James Gunn and Marvel. It's just so sad, the finality of it. And the second thing James Gunn is known for nailing is that he can make you fall in love with characters you otherwise had never heard about or would have a reason to care about. Now, of course, when it comes to Guardians of the Galaxy, Chris Pratt as Star-Lord, Peter Quill, he is the main character, but this movie really is Rocket Raccoon's story. This follows his entire life, going back to when he was first born to up to where they are now. And this plot really completely not only revolves around his life, but him currently in current day. So really, I would call the main character of this movie Rocket Raccoon, completely unironically. Now, my favorite part of this movie was the cinematography of the fight scenes. There is probably 3 or 4 scenes in this movie that I would put in my top 10 MCU fight scenes ever. Incredibly shot. Every single character gets their moment to shine. There's so many combos and tag teams, and it's just legitimately mind-blowing how these action fight sequences were shot, and I can't get enough of them, and I can't wait to see this movie again just purely for those fight scenes. Now, one thing I've been incredibly critical of for the MCU is their style of humor. It's just not for me. I get a lot of people find some stuff funny, but for me, I just really don't. Even some of the more funny movies like Thor Ragnarok or even some of the other Guardians movies, I don't necessarily think all the humor lands. But this movie is a huge exception for me. This is genuinely by far the funniest MCU movie I've ever seen. And there's so many side characters that have such minor roles but are so funny in this movie. Specifically when they go to a certain HQ, you're going to meet one guy who's just going to be in a couple scenes. But his rapport when he's talking to the Guardians, some of the most hilarious dialogue I've seen in the MCU. And beyond that, just all the jokes in this movie just worked for me. I was laughing out loud and I was digging every minute. I can't remember anything off the top of my head that made me cringe. Oh yeah, and the scene where Gamora is trying to get into a car, that had me dying. Now, on top of this being the funniest movie I've ever seen in the MCU, I think this is the most emotional movie in the MCU for me, at least. This impacted me more emotionally than any other movie, including Infinity War. And yes, knowing full well with Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, dealing with the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman, I feel like they handled that beautifully and it was so emotionally done in the opening scenes. And the rest of the movie, you handled the grief. But this movie alone, man, there's just some scenes in this movie that just had me just breaking down. Like, my eyes welled up with tears multiple times in this movie. Now, since I saw it on an early screening, you weren't allowed to have phones out, you weren't allowed to have technology out, which you shouldn't have in a movie anyways, but they extra cracked down on in early screenings. So for me, I didn't want to risk anything. I turned off my Apple Watch, which I almost never do, put it in my pocket, so I never checked my time during the movie, had no clue how much time was left, and this movie is 2.5 hours long, one of the longer MCU movies. Never felt that runtime at all. Perfectly paced. This movie just keeps going. I never felt that it dragged for a single second. Now, there's a couple things I would have tweaked in this movie to really cement it as a 5-star. I'm still giving it a 5-star because it impacted me so much and I truly loved every minute of it. But there's some major things that I personally would have just tweaked to make it really just extra perfect for me. I'm not going to get into that in this video. On the next episode of the ReelTok Podcast, when we get into the spoiler section for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I'll talk about those. But I'm not going to say this movie is without faults because there's some things I really wish he would have done different. But James Gunn just understands character work. He understands relationships and he understands how to connect with viewers because there's not a single wasted character in this. Everyone from Cosmo the dog to Peter Quill to every side character you meet is absolutely fully given justice, whether it's a fight scene, whether it's their dialogue, whether it's their emotional development, whether it's a connection to their relationships. This trilogy is just wrapped up so beautifully. Now, the High Evolutionary is one of the baddest villains we've ever seen in the MCU, and his acting performance was absolutely incredible. I was mind blown. I wanted more of him on my screen, even though you do get a ton of him. Another character that we're introduced to, Adam Warlock, played by Will Poulter, he's incredible as well. You don't get quite as much of him as the High Evolutionary, but the scenes you get with him are great. Another thing I really want to praise for this movie is the art design, the production design, the costume design, the character design, because there's so many different creatures, planets, settings, backdrops, backgrounds that are so uniquely designed, and you can really tell they put a lot of care into this because so many Marvel movies can at least pick out a scene or two where you're like, man, this VFX is rough. There's none of that here. I was never not immersed in this movie. The VFX is always spot on. James Gunn truly looked like he was not spread too thin with DC and Marvel pulling both him from both sides. I really truly think that he put so much love and care and effort into this final movie to wrap up this trilogy, and I don't think it was lacking anything. Again, when I was walking out of that theater, I was like, I'm right in between a 4.5 and a 5 out of 5 star, which is explained by my 9.5 out of 10, but I was thinking the only reason I would give it a 4.5 is because, it's a Marvel movie. I can't give that a 5 star. Yes, I can. I love this movie. Soundtrack, incredible. Comedy hits every single time. Emotion overflowing with it. This is also, I know Doctor Strange, with Multiverse of Madness, Sam Raimi, this movie tops that. This is way darker. There's way more gruesome scenes. So what do we got? Funniest movie of the MCU, most emotional, heartfelt movie of the MCU, and the darkest and the most violent movie of the MCU, all in one, while having a cast with rapport better than any other cast in the MCU. James Gunn with so much care into this, pouring all of his love into these characters. You can tell all these characters in the cast care so much about these characters and the world they've built with the Guardians of the Galaxy. This movie is nothing short of an absolute home run. Now, I can't wait for you all to experience this because this is easily my number one movie of the year so far, and I have seen 82 of them, so you can't just say, you have a Marvel movie at number one, you need to watch more movies. I promise. I can't find anyone else on the internet who's seen more 2023 releases than me. This is my first 5-star of the year, and I can't be more happy about this because I was so out on the MCU. Everyone who watches the podcast knows I'm not a huge MCU guy, so I'm not just like coming in here hyping up, my team, just saying, Marvel's back, because I really don't care. I'm not a huge Marvel or DC or superhero comic movie fanboy. I just genuinely love movies, and this is a movie that you can feel from every minute of it is handled with such care. Marvel is going to be back at the box office topping $1 billion for the first time in quite a little while because I don't think Black Panther Wakanda Forever, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania definitely didn't, Thor Love and Thunder, Doctor Strange might have, but still, it's been a long time since they've topped $1 billion. This one's absolutely going to do so. It's going to hopefully get Marvel on the back on the right track, but one thing we know for sure is that DC, you are in great hands with Mr. James Gunn at the helm, and I just really, really hope that he can bring the same energy and flavor and care to the DC universe that he did with the Guardians of the Galaxy, because I'm genuinely sad sitting here making this review, listening to the soundtrack, which best of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, but I'm just so sad listening to that and realizing that this trilogy is over because I genuinely, truly do believe this is the best trilogy of the MCU, and I think that James Gunn might be one of the greatest comic book directors of all time. But that wraps up my review. 9.5 out of 10 for 5 stars. And speaking of best comic book directors of all time, my video on Friday is going to be going over the best comic book directors of all time. So we got James Gunn, Zack Snyder, the Russo brothers, Christopher Nolan. We're going to rack and stack them. I'm going to say who are the best in order of ranking comic book directors of all time. We're going to go through all their filmographies for comic book movies. We're going to determine who's the best. So make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already so you can stay tuned for that on Friday. And as always, I'll see you in the next video just in a couple days. Back to posting twice a week, every Tuesdays and Fridays. Hit a like button if you enjoyed this video. Comment down below what your favorite Guardians of the Galaxy movie is. I know a lot of people are split between 1 and 2, and I can't wait for you all to see 3 this weekend because, oh boy, does it live up to the hype.